Dispatch operations or routing aren't just the heartbeat of a field service company. They're its lifeline. Every successful service call starts here, connecting customer needs to technician action with precision and speed. But when a company undergoes a merger or acquisition, dispatch is often one of the first areas to feel the strain. Delayed assignments, inefficient routing, and communication breakdowns become almost the new normal. And these issues ripple outward. It has downstream impact, like reduced technician productivity, frustrating customers, even frustrating the technician, which ends up eroding the margins and our profitability. But here's the good news. Dispatch efficiencies or inefficiencies rather don't have to derail your operation. With the right strategies, you can transform dispatch into a powerhouse of efficiency, helping the customer get service on time, every time, and make the life of your technicians a lot easier. And that's the topic of today's episode. And I'm excited to have with me Symeon Gum, our Lean Six Sigma expert, and Gyner Ozgul, my co-host. John, how are you doing?
Good.
Doing good.
It's episode for the year, so I'm hoping you guys are ready to take some R&R and some time off.
Yeah, looking forward to it. We just had some snow here, so.
Which means it's headed our way, Gyner.
Well, look, I want to dive straight into the topic here today, and Gyner, I want to throw this out to you first. So, when you think about dispatch or routing, in the post-merger, when you're integrating a new company, how do you think about dispatch? A lot of companies, some have it, separate from customer service. Some have it, the same department. Some have it decentralized. Every location has their own dispatch or routing department. How do you think about a dispatch organization in a platform that's aggressively doing M&A?
Yeah, typically the companies you're going to buy are smaller. And the dispatcher is going to have a duality of roles. They're typically the customer service person and the dispatcher, just because their scale. They try to optimize costs by having one person do a couple of things, right? Another area, they could be a dispatcher in a parts order, as an example, right? So you're going to find that the dispatcher is kind of a linchpin of a few processes in those smaller businesses that you're acquiring. What's more important is they have all this communal knowledge of the business and customers and technicians. They know the quirks of when the guy gets up in the morning and when he has to take his kids to a ball game in the summer, or the customer that really wants their PM on the third Tuesday of every month. All that stuff's kind of up here, right? It's not systematic. It's not mapped anywhere. And what I'd say is
knowledge.
Yeah, it's tribal, and it's really important. So you have to kind of go in there a little bit with, hey, how do I listen and learn to understand first, before I go in there and say, hey, I'm going to throw a bunch of new customers and new work at you that you're going to have to manage.
Very interesting. So, and Symeon, so with that said, we were just in the behind the scenes, we were talking about benchmarking the performance of a process. And in M&A, a lot of time is spent on benchmarking the financials and understanding the financials. Well, what about the process? So how do you, as Gyner mentioned, how do you start even thinking about the integration, and how do you think about the integration readiness for dispatch and from a process perspective?
Well, a big part of it is just like Gyner was mentioning. You've got especially smaller organizations where dispatch or routing is something that they natively inherently do amongst a lot of other customer service type functions or even financial functions. And so how do you break that out? Because again, the goal, right? We're doing M&A because we're trying to grow a successful business. We're trying to replicate it. So don't replicate the role, the people, replicate the process. And so from a dispatch routing, how do we carve that out? Well, we need to carve that out. We need to be able to go in with the observations, with the evaluation and benchmarking of that function. What does it take to perform to get a technician to a client site? And then also to recognize, and this is a change in thinking or a new thought to some people, who is the customer of the dispatch slash routing process? Gyner, you touched on it already. It's like the technician and where they live and what their hours and how far they have to drive, what the weather conditions are. But then we naturally gravitate to also the client, and they like this technician and not that technician, and what is the client's response time requirements and all the other things. And so that can kind of overwhelm it. But if you're just looking at the dispatch routing function as a separate entity, the customer is the technician. How do we give the technician what they need to be able to get to the job site successfully, to know what parts they need when they're there, to know what the expectation is, the timing, all of those things. So that's where the improvement comes in. So we're going to benchmark. What are those benchmarks? Obviously, the time to site. Obviously, things like the amount of travel time and the amount of miles, perhaps.
And utilization. Technician
Yeah.
utilization. Yeah.
But then other aspects. How does the customer satisfaction come into play, and how do we match up the skill requirements or the relationship requirements of the technician to the client? So all of those things, they're not going to show up in the financials, right? But they will show up in the operational assessments.
I love that. So to bring it back over to you here, what does healthy routing or dispatch operation looks like, especially if you're like, you're going beyond financials and you're investigating the performance of the different functions in a business, and you're zooming in on dispatch. What are you looking for? What are the tells that there may be trouble here that I have to address in my first 100 days of that integration plan?
Typically you're buying a business. Like, I want to be fair that the troubles aren't like the dispatchers are doing something wrong per se, right?
Yep.
The troubles are you're buying a business that you think you can embed into a platform, and you have these discrepancies in SLA requirements or very different customer profiles, and now you have to culturally take that person somewhere new, right? So you have to go to that person and say, McDonald's is now an important customer from you when they never had McDonald's. No, and when McDonald's called, they were probably even told that's not an important customer for you, right? So now you're making a flip, and you have to do it quickly, right? And to them, you're unwinding that cultural I don't know how to say it. It's part of that business, the heart of that business that they've had for such a long time. That's where you start to see the problem. The other problem you start to see is the fact that these dispatchers typically do more than one thing. Like, so they're doing customer service or they're doing parts, as I mentioned, 2 examples. There might be others. As you start to try to unwind that and give people more specific roles, like you're going to be a dispatcher 100% of the time, how you relay that knowledge, that innate knowledge they have on those other roles, is going to be important. And it's harder than you think, because it's not, because they know what parts to put on a vehicle, or they know this customer's name and their kids, and they've been to the customer's company Christmas party. And there are things like that you start to find out that are much more meaningful than you think. And you have to kind of take your time to kind of unwind them, so that there's a nice handoff, and so that dispatcher doesn't feel like you're chasing them away. What we're trying to do is like take their core skill, which is their dispatching, and have them focus on it 100% of the time.
Especially if you're going to try and centralize or even regionalize a function like that, right? There are relationships involved. I was just in a workshop earlier this week, and they were talking about an acquisition, and then technicians were leaving the company. They're already a little bit, things have changed, and change is always difficult. But as it turned out with this one case example, they were leaving the company because they didn't like the dispatcher. So they felt like the new dispatcher was rude and was very abrupt and wasn't very personable. And so
Wow.
that factored into the technician staying with the company. It's like, oh my goodness. Well, yeah. So the people side of that and being aware of those relationships, it just is. It's a very human thing. So we have to acknowledge it and assess it.
So that's interesting. So then, how do you think about that? How do you think about to centralize or not to centralize? And how did you think about that, Gyner, in in your last stint, scaling a platform, taking it to $1 billion? How do you get there? Because it can have. Yeah, do you think about it regional? Do you keep it local? And there's I don't know. How do you think about the structure of your dispatch department?
So
At the platform level.
I'm going to tell you like a full circle story. Like when I first started in kind of the service world, everything was branch based, very decentralized. Your dispatchers were in branches all across the country. Then everything got centralized, right? Everything was like a centralized dispatch call center. Everybody was moving to centralization and optimization of that. And I think today technology allows you to do both. Okay. And I think there's something very special with having dispatchers in the regions that the customers are in because they understand, they can relate, right? But technology can still allow you to centralize that process, right? So you can have a dispatcher in Florida and one in California and one in Chicago, all working for you under a central team, right? But they're all remote and they're working in the areas that the technicians are and the customers are, which makes them more relatable, right? For those businesses. So I actually there's been an evolution of thought there where I actually have a lot of conviction that you should keep the best dispatchers in the best geographies and use technology to do the centralization part, right? And look, there's a subset conversation there on remote work versus home working from home. I'm not even getting into that. I'll let the companies decide what that piece of it is. But in terms of having them there, there's a lot of power in that. Also, by doing that, you enable yourself to get the best talent, right? You're building this unconscious process in the business where I'm flexible to get the best dispatchers, because you're not always going to get the same dispatchers when you try to put 200 of them in one building. It's going to be a lot harder than finding 200 all across the country, and they're really good and they're really experienced and they can do a good job for you.
Yeah, there's that people, process, and technology facet of how they all come together to be able to create the right value. And I think with
and go ahead, Symeon. Sorry.
No, just again that's where the dispatch is an important part of the overall value stream to the end customer, a critical part. But then when you break that down and you look at the subset, okay, how do we create the very best dispatch process? How do we identify the best system to support our dispatching, and especially if we've got remote work going on, and if it's a decentralized but centralized through technology, obviously the technology matters. Focusing in on, well, what are the requirements of the customer? And the customer in this case of the dispatch function is the technician, because they receive the output, right? So let's make sure that output is sufficient to enable the technicians to do their job, which of course is ultimately customer facing. So that can help by kind of breaking it down, recognizing that yes, this is an overall function for the client that needs a technician on site, but that the output of the dispatch, of the routing, is to try and make the technician's job easier so that they have the right input to be able to perform their work.
I love that. And so then, what are some of the low-hanging fruit opportunities for improving dispatch operation in a newly merged company, or that you've seen work quite well? And I know, there's no cookie cutter. Every company has its own nuances and different setups and all. But has there been any kind of a playbook, that go-to playbook for improving dispatch operation in a newly merged company for you, Gyner and Symeon?
For me, it's like making sure that they're not overwhelmed already. Because a lot of times you buy these businesses and you find out on day one, like that dispatcher is already doing too much, right? And well, how do you figure that out? You look at call wait times for customers, and they're minutes, not seconds, and that matters, right? Because especially in service-related businesses, customers that are calling you don't have the patience to be on hold for minutes. They don't. For them, those minutes seem like a lot longer, right? So like one low-hanging fruit is just understanding that they're not already over capacity. Another low-hanging fruit I have found simple enough is that their technology is current. And when I say technology, is like their computer isn't like 8 years old and it takes them like 5 minutes to move a call. You will find that that's the case a lot more than you think. And then spending a couple $100 on a new computer for them makes them more efficient, like on day one. It's really funny. The other thing is just understanding where they're at, like sitting with them and just like, where are they with all the change? But more importantly, like, you may have a really good dispatcher that even before the transaction or nothing to do with the transaction is feeling a certain way about their role in the organization, and it hasn't been addressed. That's also low-hanging fruit because you can fix that, right? I guess the last one is, and for us, I mean, we worked with Ozgul in my past lives. The idea of, hey, if there's opportunity to scale the revenue of the business really quickly, and the inhibitor is I don't have enough kind of dispatch customer service capabilities, like finding a resource that you can bolt in pretty quickly to help with that and creating a use case for that, right? So, for us, it was, we took a number of, I think it was Ozgul dispatchers at the time, and we assigned them to a number of portals, right, that were bringing in calls for us.
Yes.
So that our core dispatchers could focus on those local relationships where the customer would call and they really need handholding. And meanwhile, the distraction of the portal administration, which usually takes more time.
That's a big one.
In other industries, by the way, they're called third-party administrators. So just using like common knowledge here, because we don't want to be stuck on like just one end market. Those third-party administrators or portals have a lot of administrative burden that comes with them. And sometimes it's better right away to move that somewhere else, find an outsourcing partner to move that, and let your core dispatchers focus on continue to build those relationships for your customers and technicians.
That's a huge one. Symeon, what some of playbooks or low-hanging fruits you look for to improve a dispatch operation?
I think Gyner touched on this, because it manifests in two ways. That first 100 days, you as the acquirer, there's a zillion things that you're trying to address. Here's one. Right, so I think part of it is, how do you think about is the dispatch/routing function, is that the low-hanging fruit, or is it okay? Do you leave it alone for now and you go focus on the other 999,000 things that you need to address? So being able to, that playbook, having the different functions clearly delineated and knowing where you're at with each of them, that assessment, not just from a financial standpoint but from an operational standpoint, the dispatch function, how much attention does it need? And that does manifest in how it's being performed and by who it's being performed in the legacy business. So if somebody is doing 5 different functions and dispatch is one of them, then is the dispatch a low-hanging fruit that we can bring that into the platform side and perform it better? or are they doing some things where we can't replicate it immediately? So needing to look at it from that standpoint, and then from a people standpoint, is it something that they enjoy, or is it something that they're, this particular individual in the acquired business, are have they had to do it? It's the last thing they want to do. They want to do the other four functions, and they're really good at those. And dispatch is something that they'll be happy to get. So you can build a lot of goodwill, right, with the new teams by taking the functions and then helping them to see it's not just about your job, your one job. You don't have one job. You're doing five jobs. We can't fix all five of them simultaneously, but in this particular context of this discussion, what do you think about that dispatch part of your job? What can we do to make that easier? Is it something that you enjoy? Is it you've got some great best practices. We'd love for you to share that with the other businesses too. I think you can help us to advance our dispatch capabilities, and we're going to make you a subject matter expert. Would that appeal to you? Or no, that dispatch is the last thing I want to do. It's always it always interrupts my other work. Okay, then there's a different story there. So low-hanging fruit also involves what the people think of it, and it's a prioritization. So what do we address first?
So and working with platforms such as when we were working with Gyner and other when we work with field service companies, really our biggest struggle is there's typically no standards to, for instance, routing protocols, or how do you prioritize calls, what's urgent, what's not urgent. These are, like Gyner said, these are a lot of it are is tribal knowledge. Some dispatchers prioritize proximity, others prioritize technician availability. So what's the standards? I think the first thing is we found really helpful is to just document it and establish a single routing standard. I mean, it doesn't, there will always be exceptions, almost always, but kind of like, document those standards makes it a lot easier. Like Gyner said, sometimes it's really hard to find great dispatchers, and especially if you're scaling. But establishing those standards, documenting these helps a lot in reducing travel time. Like you said, time to service, on-time service rates, improving those is key. Again, a lot of companies don't. You'd be surprised. A lot of companies don't leverage GPS tracking. So understanding, knowing where the technician is and their availability in real time. Sometimes a struggle, but also having GPS tracking helps when you're reconciling the timesheets for the technicians, and if a customer is disputing the rates and whatnot, and kind of keeps your the accuracy of payroll it gets improved a lot having GPS tracking.
And that's a great point of how the different processes or different parts of the business relate together too, right? Because to your point, an owner operator company, a smaller company, that might be something they've thought about, but just have not had the the overhead support or the funding to be able to capitalize on something like that. But now you've got a larger platform company, but it's not a dispatch function, right? It's not typically not the dispatcher or dispatcher organization that says, "Oh, hey, we need telematics on all the vehicles." It's a fleet function, and so
Yes.
how is fleet managed? And maybe it's not a dispatcher priority or low hanging fruit. Maybe it's a fleet low hanging fruit, and the dispatch group can benefit from it. And so we always talk about inputs and outputs, right, Yassin? And that's something when we talk about delineating or separating out the functions. Every function has an output and requires inputs to be able to get to that output. So when you have the dispatch function, you have an output, which is a route or a client location, a schedule, and that the beneficiary of that output is the technician. But then the dispatcher has a series of inputs that are required, and they may prioritize, to your comment, they may prioritize one input over another. Maybe because they're a relationship-based business and they have a lot of key clients, the biggest priority is making sure that the right technician gets to the right client, right? And that technician is always available. But it's the route or the distance or the timing or the schedule. Those are still inputs. They're just not the critical input for this particular business. So it can help if you're a platform company and you're acquiring, figure out, what are those key, maybe 10 or 12 key inputs into the dispatch function. And then as you're going from business to business, as you're bringing additional businesses in, they should have, in one way, shape, or form, all 10 of those inputs to be able to perform the dispatch output to the dispatch function. But they're going to prioritize those inputs
and one of
differently. Yeah, sorry.
And so talking about inputs, one of the key defects in the inputs that we find is the inaccuracy of, and that really frustrates the technician. Incorrect addresses or service details are, it's not included in the work order, or who should I talk to, or making sure the intake of the service call is complete and accurate, and then properly documented in the FSM, so that when the technician picks up that call, they have all the information that they need right there, which reduces a lot of frustration and sometimes missed calls, or so that was that's, and I'll from Gyner actually. I learned it from Gyner. We had, just the same mindset. It's like, how do you free up the technician, the dispatcher, from the admin stuff? It's like simple follow-ups to the customer after, confirming the dispatch or confirming the schedule, and keeping them posted on, if a part is not available and we got to order it and there are delays, like keeping the customer, like work order status updates. Was a good unlock for us, which reduced lost jobs or reschedules. So that was something I learned working with Gyner, stealing from you always, Gyner.
Yeah, I mean,
great.
One thing that we haven't talked about is in all these businesses, whether you call it utilization or billed versus paid time, or the number one key metric you have to understand in all these services as you acquire them is, how do they calculate billed versus paid time? And how does that match up with your definition of that, right? Because everybody's billing construct typically is a little different. Is trip charge part of that contract or not? Do they even have a trip charge? Do they bill portal to portal and you bill time on site plus trip? Do you bill in between trips? How do you bill weekends and overtime? All those nuances have a big impact on your gross profit and understanding, right? So really getting in there on day one and understanding their billed versus paid approach will be very helpful for you, right? Doesn't even mean you change any of it, just understand it. Because as you go and you sell new business, because now you're using this new company that you acquired as an expansion typically of geography, and you sell new business, you got to make sure your sales team, who may be selling the platform's view of billed versus paid time, isn't misrepresenting a business that you have now underneath your umbrella that for a while will still continue to operate as it did before you acquired them, right? So that definition is really important to understand.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And what are some of I think there's a delay. Go ahead, Symeon.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, and that is a component that can come out of the evaluation of that dispatch function. In fact, Gyner, to your point, that's probably oftentimes a linkage. If they're carrying more than one role, that's probably the role, right, of determining the overtime and determining the factoring in that aspect of the costing of the billable versus paid.
Yep.
No, fantastic. So as we close this episode, if there's one advice each of you could give a COO, a CEO, or a VP of operation who's undergoing a merger right now, one thing that they should keep their eye out for as they're integrating their dispatch operation or a gotcha, what would your advice be to them, Gyner and Symeon?
For me, it's understand build versus paid time, because that's your biggest watch out as a KPI. 2 is make sure you don't go in there and disrupt their process until you understand it. And 3 is people are people, right? So get to know the people that you're acquiring in those roles. So like if you understand their build versus paid time, you're protecting the P&L of the business that you bought, right? Understanding their process is really, really important. Even if their process isn't written down, they have a process, trust me, because they do the same things every single day, which innately means they have a process, right? It's just not written down.
It's just not written down.
Right? And third, as we've mentioned several times on this call, they know the customers, they know the technicians, they know all the nuances of that dispatch function for that business. Don't chase them away. Don't think you're better than them on day one. That will catch up with you, and it will haunt you.
In the form of lost customers. That's what. Yeah, and I think really my point as an enabler to what everything that Gyner just described, is you're going to go into a business with an idea of what best practice dispatching and routing looks like, of how that adds value to the overall delivery. So you'll have that, but then the recognition of, okay, what are the variations on that particular function, and then allow the time, and don't assume that the folks that are doing 5 different jobs or 3 different jobs, that they're thinking about it in that way. You're going to have to spend some time to help them differentiate what's dispatch and what's not. They might not even think in those, they might not use those words, right? Is it dispatch? Is it routing? Is it scheduling? Is it technician? Is it work orders?
Customer support. Yep.
Yeah, so spend some time. There's going to be some education, because you don't want to lose the great talent that you're bringing on board, and that you want to continue to adapt the best practices. Spend some time with the people so that they can start to think about that specific function and what makes it work.
I love it. And that's a wrap for today's episode on optimizing.
We're having wait.
Okay.
Go ahead. We have a dispatch episode a week before Christmas, and you're not going to talk about who's the greatest route-based guy of all time, which is the Santa thing. I mean, he delivers presents all around the world efficiently in 24 hours. Come on.
But is that a NORAD function, or is that a?
Well, yeah. Well, with the holidays, being in the holiday season, wishing everyone happy holidays and a great kickoff to the new year. And hopefully a good dispatch from Santa with a good gift. I'm definitely spending some time with the family over the next few weeks and taking some time off. I'll try to take some time off. We've got we just finished our planning session yesterday, and I'm like, oh my god, probably need another 2 to 3 workshops so we can lock it all in. But what are you guys doing during the holidays? Let me ask that before we wrap up today's episode. What are you planning for the holidays, Gyner and Symeon?
Family first, right? It's always great to have time, some downtime to spend with the family. So always looking for that.
Yeah, same here. Plan on taking my spouse, and we're gonna go to New York for a couple days and just hang out. Nothing planned per se. We're really just gonna, so right after Christmas, we're gonna go there for a couple of days. But yeah, I mean, just kind of, my son's at home from school. We want to just kind of catch up. The year goes by so fast that having a couple weeks to just catch up is really important.
Absolutely. And I'm looking forward to kicking off 2025 with another episode together or we'll most likely maybe we should tackle next billing. Billing is big. Maybe we should start the year uh, the year and talking about the finance side of M&A, and how to bring that cash flow in faster and untangle some of the knots that typically that are in billing and the invoicing department. With that said, I would love to hear your thoughts. What are some of the challenges you are facing in your dispatch operation or in integrating a new organization, and how are you planning to address them in 2025? Drop us a message, or connect with me on social media. I'd love to hear from you. And with that said, thank you for tuning in, and from all of us here, happy holidays, and we'll see you in 2025.